Hey everyone, this is Tom, and this week's character is Zyrrazzis for Kevin. I was really happy to see that Kevin won. He's been around for a long time participating in this, and he even at one point sent me a 3 different types of cookies and a calendar that I have on my desk where I work here. He's been just a great supporter and a great online pal and fan, and his feedback and everything has been great. So I was super excited when I saw that he had won. This week's character, the theme for the week was evil characters, and I thought it was a bit of a neat thing. But when I saw that Kevin had won, but it was that theme week, I almost felt a little bit bad because I'm sure he's got some other characters that he probably holds a lot more dear than digging up old Zyrrazzis. He has it written down here. Zyrrazzis. Took me a while to remember how to pronounce it, and I'm still having trouble. But thankfully he was willing to play by the rules, and this was just such a great opportunity for character design. Mostly just because, as I've mentioned millions of times by now, that I love creatures and creaturely characters. It's just such a fun challenge to work out anatomy, and actually while I'm drawing it I may as well talk about that. But yeah, creature design is my favorite thing to do, so this is always awesome when this happens. You know, elves and humans and half elves are totally welcome and fine, but it's such a nice change of pace to do something like this. So when working this out, and she's a gnoll, so that's basically hyena people. I might have gone a little bit literal, but it seems like by and large that's sort of how Wizards of the Coast kind of likes things to be done as far as gnolls go, and I've always really liked the look, and so I went along with it. I didn't do anything too different from the normal. I actually went pretty straightforward, but as far as things go, I've got a little bit of a pet peeve with creatures that have I can't remember the word, dog legs, basically, where they've got the really angular legs. They're walking up on their toes. I see a lot of the time people draw them with a really almost like a right angle, where in the leg where the section between the knee and the ankle are like parallel to the floor, and that always drives me crazy. I mean, I think the look of one of these, of a dog leg type shape, is cool. It works, sort of like gargoyles, like Disney's gargoyles. I think it was Disney. But when you have that angle, I think that's just way too much. Can't really think of any bipedal animals that have that. Ostriches do have a very ground parallel section of their leg like that, but they've got really huge muscles and the leverage is all different. They've got really sort of stumpy upper legs, so it's a lot easier for that. Basically, it comes down to exertion and the amount of effort and energy that it would take to hold your leg that steady or that at that angle. So I usually like to have them just not be as extreme of an angle. So in this case, I mean, it's still at an angle, which is fine, but she is sort of her legs are a bit more bent, like she's sort of in a sort of a motion pose. So I was okay with having that, but that's always been a pet peeve of mine. As far as the anatomy goes, or the other anatomy, just sort of a wider, flared out gorilla style rib cage. Not as extreme as a gorilla, but something that would just sort of exaggerate that shape and be a little bit more visually interesting. But it also, she is very large. She's about 6.5 feet tall, so she's gonna have to have a big lung capacity and big heart and stuff. So got to have some room for the organs there. But also just being strong, and it's like sort of a bit more of a dynamic look, and without being the typical V-shaped bodybuilder, football player kind of type body. It's a good way to have somebody look strong, but without seeming too traditionally athletic, I suppose you'd say. I did a lot of sketches at first beforehand in my sketchbook of just hyena heads and hyena skulls. And even though I wasn't looking to make it like 100% exactly like a hyena, it is slightly different because I don't want it to just be like a fruit salad kind of creature, is what I call it, where you just take a bunch of different parts from animals and stick them together. I want it to be like something that you'd still call a hyena, and it definitely looks like a hyena, but something that's just slightly a bit different. But drawing the faces with different expressions, and I guess I don't know if you call them expressions, but like mouth open, mouth closed, look like side 3/4 from behind, that sort of stuff. All these different things to help reinforce a sense of the actual shape and structure of the head, rather than just being able to look at a piece of reference like a photo and recreate it. When it comes to creatures and animals, I don't like to just do that. I've seen just a lot of the times like artists will just like, if they need a picture of a bird, they'll just look up bird, and then they'll just basically draw it or even sometimes trace it, and to me that's just really sort of shameful, especially if it's like a pretty common animal, or even if it's not a common animal, but if they've got it's sort of fun to find them out, but whatever animal they have, you just type that into Google, and a lot of the time you'll find it on the first page. It's just like a 1-to-1 lift of that piece. Anyway, so even like if you do end up using like reference, which is a great idea, it's nice to at least put in that extra time to at least get some sense of the structure and familiarity, so that you can turn the head around in your head and draw it at whatever angle you need to. I mean, a lot of angles do get a bit too complicated for things, but I find it really helps. So anytime I'm doing like a new creature or something, I always try to do some preliminary stuff like that. In the case of Zyrrazzis, I just drew up the skull first. That was sort of my main issue. I figure even with creatures, if you get the skull right, then when you put the meat on top, it'll all work out. Even though sometimes it's really hard to tell what an animal is by its skull. Sometimes it's really obvious, but other times it's not. Like if you haven't seen one before, look up like a manatee or a dugong skull, and it doesn't make a lot of sense when you first see it. And if someone showed it to you, or even if you've seen it, try showing it to your friends who haven't seen it and see if they can guess what it is. And I would probably put money on them not being able to. But either way, you get it all in there and the structure's going to work out, and it should just be fine. Last year I did do a bunch of sketches of cats and dogs, a whole big pile of those. And I was expecting to see, when I was doing the hyena stuff, I was expecting it to be a lot like one of those skulls, but there is actually some differences that were a little bit interesting. Like they have an entirely enclosed eye socket, if my memory serves me correctly at this point. I didn't draw that this way in the case of Zyrrazzis. It's almost more like a cave bear skull, at least in the eye sockets, where they've got that little open part. But that's not too bad. So once again, not really having an exactly set order of events as far as approach goes. I'm still narrowing it down, but I'm getting there. At this point, I was adding in the color variations of the coat of her fur coat, but I started getting carried away and treating it more like the rendering and the occlusion. So I put a stop to that and had to make an occlusion layer really quick here. This actually ended up being quite useful, is just doing all the rendering on one separate layer. Even within the last couple of years, a lot of the time I would do things sort of all to itself on a layer. Like all the armor would be on one layer, and it would all be rendered and painted up in like a little group, or even sometimes on its own layer. But I actually had been really enjoying doing it all for the whole character over top this way. I mean, in the case of Zyrrazzis, I was really interested in working on the anatomy, and so I do render it out quite a bit, even though she's covered up a lot in the end. I think maybe it was just a mix of finally doing something a bit more animalistic and savage and interesting looking, and also just being curious to see, or just making sure that it is actually working out before I get too far. But I mean, I definitely didn't need to do all this, but it's definitely fun, and it's always great practice. So one thing I did as well when working it out is I figured out sort of a pose, kind of like a just I've been enjoying pushing myself into doing a bit more animated or active poses, and this was no exception. A lot of the time, the hardest part is the hands and making it look like somebody's actually holding something and getting their wrists in the right spot, and even just like how far away the bones are from the thing you're holding, and all the padding in the hands and all that stuff, and keeping track of all the fingers, and there's a lot to it, but it really does help to get reference for hands. I mean, of course, with everything. But one thing that I did as well is I increased the size of the hands and the length and width of the forearms, make it a bit more simian, more apish. It makes them seem a little bit less civilized and more wild and animalistic. Plus, it would seem weird, and I think it would look wrong to me if I had something with dog legs and just normal human arms. It wouldn't carry the same amount of weight up high, and I think the anatomy in the way that it is would require that. I think if the arms were human proportioned, it would just look a bit silly and oafish, I think, especially with like a big neck like that and like a big like cantilevered vertebra spine and like that hunched over hyena sort of look. Just imagining in it right now, it's just sort of normal arms. It would be almost like a werewolf from a low budget film, and that's no good. And plus, big hands and big feet are always just more interesting, in my opinion. I remember at one point I was watching How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. I always used to like roll my eyes at it growing up when I was a lot more smug and stupid. But when I finally saw it, it was actually excellent, and I recommend it, and I've made students watch it and everything. But I remember the artist that they had in there, I can't remember what the name was, Buscema, maybe? But he was drawing this picture of Dr. Doom, and he was talking about making the hands bigger and made them seem more powerful and menacing, and maybe that's where I'm getting it from. Well, it doesn't explain all the big feet I draw on all the heroes and good guys, but the hands, anyway. Big hands will make like a character look a bit more strong, and it's always more dynamic. I think the big hands, it's like it just works good on a long arm, especially. I mean, depending on the anatomy and the age and the race and the whatever the character has, will affect all the little bits of proportion. So basically, one of the probably the biggest way that Zyrrazzis, this depiction of a Nold is different is I just gave her smaller eyes, just a bit more like batish or mole-ish, something. I guess I wouldn't say nocturnal, but cave-ish. I mean, definitely more of like a nighttime. She does do a lot of stalking, and I think like her ears being so big, it would kind of work well with to have little eyes. She does sort of remind me of the depiction of wargs in the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings movies, but it's not really that horrible of a thing to be reminded of those movies. So in the case of Zyrrazzis also, I think a big part of it is of why I spent so much time rendering on the anatomy, or rendering it out, is there is a lot in her costume. Kevin provided me with a very long description and history, which was very great to read. But there's a lot of little pieces and a lot of things to do with the character. So maybe I was just sort of dreading fitting it all in and finding spots and designing everything and texturizing it and rendering it. But also just anatomy is just so fun. It's one of the best parts. It's one of the best things about just learning. If you're worried about poses or anatomy or creature design or anything, studying anatomy does a lot to get rid of that intimidation. Definitely. When you understand, like, there's just the proportion and the range of motion of the joints, like starting there with the skeleton, you can basically work out stick figures and then just point to point the shapes, and then the muscles will just, if you know where something goes and what's there and what general shape it is, you can just lay it out and figure it out and just put things where they got to go, and wherever it lands is where it's going to land. And even if it looks weird, the one of the hardest parts is just learning that even if it looks weird, it might still be right. Especially when you have figures and limbs at odd angles and with a lot of foreshortening, it can be scary to just let things be how they should be or be how they are. I actually bought a book. I haven't actually looked through it too much since I bought it, even though I wanted it really bad. But it's actually, I don't see it, but it's like a yoga anatomy book, and they have a lot of things explaining like what muscle groups are being used in different poses, and there's a lot of extreme angles and almost like overextending of different limbs and things, and it's actually really nice to just to see, like, it sort of just demystifies the body and just sort of shows it, it's just a thing, it's just going to be around. But learning about like what the muscles are, and actually there's a lot of muscles that you sort of don't really need to know, a lot of like subsurface stuff that's like deeper muscles or the deep tissue muscles, but the superficial muscles are really good to learn. And learning where they connect is as important as learning what shape they are, but also learning what they do is fantastic. I actually recently came across a guy on YouTube who does sell a lot of like his lessons, like in-depth lessons on his website. They're a bit pricey, but they're excellent. It would be a good birthday present for me, because they're just so informative. But he goes by Proko, Proko, and on YouTube he has a lot of videos that sort of do a great job of showing off what sort of stuff he does, like explaining muscle groups and breaks them down into really manageable chunks, but in a really good way. And the thing that I like about him too is that he has a 3D model of a skeleton with muscles and stuff on it, and it's a very good sculpt, and it's a very excellent example. It's really it can actually be really hard to find good anatomical 3D models that have the right sort of essence to them. It's hard to say. There's just a lot of really stiff, more medical. You'd think that medical would be better, but there's definitely better ones, and there's worse ones. But Proko has a very, very, very good one. So I'd recommend him looking into his videos on YouTube if you want some really good stuff with anatomy. Especially, I found his work to be. It really the one that I found most helpful was the one about the muscles on the shoulder blade going to the humerus, and also general back muscles and stuff, because that's always been like something that's just felt so daunting and stressful. And he did a great job of explaining all the little parts. And now it's like a no-brainer. Like, even just after watching like a 5-minute video, it just makes perfect sense. And yeah, it really helps out a lot. It's even like if you ever do life drawing and the person isn't really lean or ripped or like ultra muscular, and you can sort of sometimes see like it's like the more you look, the more infinitely detailed the body gets, with all these tiny, super subtle little lumps and bumps. But once you go in and research the anatomy, those are just like, you don't know which one to include, you don't know which one you can summarize, you don't know which one you can or should enhance or whatever. But if you know what the muscle is, then you'll have a much better sense of how to depict it. So yeah, studying anatomy, very important, very rewarding. There's a really big payoff. Learning anatomy takes care of a lot of art. especially with creature design. Also do animals too. Study animals too, I'd say. So while I'm rendering this out, I think it would be wise to go over the information about Zyrrazzis. So Zyrrazzis was born to the Knoll clan of Thrinn and was raised in an environment of brutality and bloodlust. Devout followers of their fiendish god prince Enogu, pressure and competition from her kin led Zyrrazzis to a life of pride and one-upsmanship in order to provide her god with the greatest sacrifices, who delighted in the more intelligent specimens for the sole fact that they often screamed and pleaded more for their pitiful existence. Though strong compared to the prey she sought, her physical prowess often paled in comparison to many of her clan. She instead excelled by way of cunning and a knack for remaining unseen and unheard until necessary, often by changing her very shape to that of an unimposing fawn via druidic magic taught to her by the clan mothers. Sorry, it's just far away. I'm trying to zoom in with my eyeballs. Let me just enlarge this text a bit. Okay, so instead of rushing blindly and aggressively toward her prey, most frequently small groups of travelers, her stalking and observing them, sometimes for days, allowed her to select the choices of victims for her dark goals. While most of her brethren would hunt in small blood packs, Zyrrazzis found them both noisy and relatively uncooperative to work with. Not to mention their natural inclination towards competition made her suspicious of fratricide, something not uncommon in Clan Thrinn. She instead took to hunting with a leopard companion, a natural fit for her with its natural affinity to stalking and ambush. Remaining in such close proximity to her prey for so long, combined with her natural curiosity, allowed her to pick up bits and nuances of the common tongue, and though her kin would leave books, scrolls, and the like, as it afforded them little to no practical use, Zyrrazzis became fascinated by them, often collecting literature and seeking solitude to stare at the interesting writings, even if she didn't fully comprehend them. A favorite of hers belonged to a particularly vocal human clad in robes whom she sacrificed. The book's glyphs seemed to spring to life when she stared at them, glittering and glowing on the page. It was unlike anything she'd seen, and she wanted to know more. Knowing it was a risk, she presented the spellbook to Thrinn's eldest clan mother, who claimed the magic as forbidden, as the clan's magic users were only warlocks and druids. An affront to Enogu's will, her pride and anger bubbling forth, Zyrrazzis traded verbal bards with the clan mother, saying there was much about the lesser races to learn in order to cause them more pain and suffering, furthering Enogu's wrath and bloodshed. Horrified, the clan mother denounced Zyrrazzis' actions before her entire clan, causing the young gnoll to become a shamed laughingstock for her curiosities into mankind. Zyrrazzis' kin shunned her at first, mocking her whenever she was around, and as weeks passed, aggression became more and more prevalent until a blood pack confronted her on a hunt. First killing her prey, a guarded caravan, and then turning to her. Her siblings beat her to within an inch of her life and would have slaughtered her completely if not for the leopard companion's ability to drive them off, taking advantage of the fact that Zyrrazzis' brethren were already exhausted from dealing with the fortified caravan. Beaten, broken, and ashamed, the female gnoll fled into exile forever with her only companion. Although she didn't fully understand the language of the other races, or of the fairer races, her keen observations gave her enough confidence to communicate using a combination of body language and the broken smattering of the common tongue she had pieced together. Using her ability to change forms with magic, Zyrrazzis spent the next year on the fringes of society, taking the norm of nondescript humanoids to blend in. Sating her curiosity of how the weaker races lived and exploiting those weaknesses, she learned with each new moon in a ritual sacrifice to Enogu that was so ingrained into her past that it was too strong to shake. Much to her interest, however, being in such close proximity to humans for so long, she discovered impressive individuals who spoke of conquest and victory in their travels. Her curiosity piqued, the inquisitive gnoll spent enough time getting to know the group, as well as proving herself as a skilled asset in the wild, that a mutual respect was struck up. Only time would tell how well those bonds of appreciation would hold with each subsequent moon, however, when her bloodlust to appease her fiendish god would drive her to ritual sacrifice once more. Okay, so I'm going to put that on hold for just a sec. Back to the drawing, and what I'm doing here is, once I've got the anatomy figured out, I went through all of this description, and I edited it down and summarized the core sort of traits. So the Word document that I wound up with had a point, like the paragraph of the physical description with the parts of her outfit that absolutely had to be depicted as just objective pieces. Like, she has a skull, a wyvern skull mask, a grizzly skin, a grizzly hide poncho sort of thing. All these different things that just had to be there. And then starting with the costume sketch here, I'm making sure that I'm just anchoring that stuff in and putting that stuff in just to sort of commit it. A lot of the time I'll have, if I'm doing stuff from a list, I'll even make it bold. I can make everything bold, and whenever I add something, I'll make it unbold, just to help keep my brain clear. If I can just structure things a bit more orderly like that, it comes in really handy. So starting off with just like really loose sketches, just making sure I'm not missing anything and it's all there, and that it all fits. I don't want to like go too far into the development and find out that she has something around her neck or like some sort of like pouch or belt that I forgot about, and then have to go in and repaint that, going over the shoulder and changing the hair around it and all that. So this is just a nice way for me to put in the stuff that I know is going to have to be there. Okay, so the core traits. Exiled from her clan, Zyrrazzis found a surrogate family within her adventuring companions. Although she holds a respect for her abilities, her loyalty to her bloodthirsty god and her leopard companion, and would be far more willing to betray the very party itself than either her faith or animal companion. Zyrrazzis is a master of many forms, allowing her to deftly change her body to suit her needs, her gear melding into her with each shape change. Each month she will break off from the group at hand to find a wayward traveler to stalk, take captive, and ritually slaughter to appease her evil deity, something she most frequently does around a new moon phase, allowing her to best make use of her keen dark vision when there's no moonlight available to the inferior eyes of many lesser races. Although she knows this will likely result in her being hunted or, at worst, confronted by her compatriots, her pride and dark devotion make it something she is unable to resist. Although she speaks the common tongue, there is still a boorish and often aggressive edge to it, causing her to be generally disliked by those she meets. Having acquired a ring of sustenance, Zyrrazzis does not need to eat or drink, though she can and does, mainly during those periods of bloodlust or to blend in with others, and requires little sleep to function. With her affinity towards solitude, she often scouts for those in her group who need more sleep and preparation for the day. She spends her free time reading books, as best she can anyway, learning how to write, mostly by copying words she finds unique and interesting in said books, and whittling. Although she associates with the adventuring party, it is primarily survival, for survival, mutual respect, and conquest of foes more powerful than herself. Her only friend is her leopard companion, and is incredibly distrustful of everyone else, very selfish and often boastful due to her prideful upbringing. Though she will never admit it to anyone, she is legitimately terrified of her former clan rallying on a hunt to destroy her, or worse, sacrifice her for her transgressions. She combats this with a devotion to her god, confident that her unconventional stance is becoming close to the weaker races will ultimately cause them greater fear and pain to exploit in his dark name, thereby granting her greater favor than Clan Thrin. After all, if Inogu stands with her, how could her family stand a chance? So yeah, she's evil. Oh boy. So the ritual, in parentheses, I'll admit that this can get a little grim, but since I'm unaccustomed to playing sinister characters, I wanted something that would truly terrify me if I lived in this world, and wanted to push myself outside of my comfort zone. Feel free to skip reading this next bit if you choose, and instead note that she selects humanoid prey based on who will provide the most fear and screaming for her sinister deity. Just one note while working on this on this piece at this stage. I find the way that I'm coloring with everything on one layer, where I've got the cloak, I've got the teeth, the mouth meat, the dark fur, the base fur, all that stuff. Especially on with her mask here, this like bone mask, by having it all on one layer by itself, which you can then render and depict and shade and sort of add color variations to as I'm doing. The good thing about doing that is, like, now if I were to select the layer that fur cloak is on, I can just change that color of that fur without needing to select it with the lasso tool or a magic wand. Like, it preserves all the edges and the colors, and it's all distinct. And even once it's rendered, or any part of her is rendered, I can still change the colors and tweak things. So one of the awesome benefits of this, of which there are many, is that I can go in and lay out a lot of different chunks, and rather than sit there and hem and haw about what color might work well with what, or make sure that pick colors that don't blend into other things too much, I can just put something in and then adjust it with the color adjustments to the color that I know it should be and what it should look like. So that was something that I just happened to work out when I was doing a graphic novel, where coloring the first page in a scene that you color is by far the longest one, because you're also choosing the colors that you're putting in. And so rather than like color something and it doesn't work and then recoloring it, I just found that if I just put in whatever color I need, like that, just in that shape, even just like big flat neon pink, neon green, whatever, and just put that where it should go, and then just change the sliders that way, that sped things up so fast. And that's where I got that from. That's sort of why I do it. The skull itself is based on a Carnatosaurus skull, definitely distinct from it, but I really like basing dragons on dinosaurs as much as possible, at least at the skull level, and usually like rib cage and vertebra and hind legs and front legs and tails and things. But if you ever want to know, like, if there were dragons and what their skull would be shaped like underneath all the skin and scales, probably wouldn't be that different from a dinosaur. Okay, so back to the ritual. Her monthly ritual involves stalking various groups and selecting a prime individual, typically one of weak character who talks a lot. Once she chooses her prey, she will often knock him or her out quietly and drags them off into the woods, either killing the remaining group or leaving them to their own fears of the Scream Reaper. That's what Zyrrazzis is. She's the Scream Reaper. Something she'd heard whispered in her time spent amongst society. She often ties the victim to a tree, well away from others, waiting until they regain consciousness before brutally dismembering them piece by piece, and using her magic to further torture him or her, maiming and flaying the victim until his or her wails appease her fiendish god prince. This will often attract predatory beasts, and once her grisly deed is done, often finalized by collecting a small portion of their blood in a ceramic jug as a vile keepsake. She allows nature to run its course, leaving horrified search parties to find naught but blood and bone. If the victim is particularly noteworthy, she is not above cannibalizing her prey, making sure to let them see as much of it as possible to further induce dread, terror, suffering, and begging. Actually, that's sort of weird. Today at work, I was talking with some coworkers, and we were talking about how horrible it would be to be killed by a bear compared to a lion, because they'll eat you alive, and big cats will kill you first. That's sort of a weird connection. There's always connections with when I do these characters. Anyway, okay, so that was pretty horrible. Physical appearance. This is good stuff. Well, that's all good, but this is stuff I like the most. Although cutting an average at best silhouette compared to others of her race, Zyrrazzis is still 6'6" tall and fairly bulky compared to the fair races, primarily due to her hunched posture and thick neck. Between that and her large digitigrade feet, that's the word, digitigrade. This is when they walk on their toes, digits. Much of her 200-pound frame is well muscled. Her hyena-like body is covered in coarse, tan fur covered in dark brown spots, and is often caked in dirt and blood, as she only bathes in order to keep her offensive scent masked enough that it won't alert her prey to her presence until it's too late for them. She has a mane of ruddy brown hair that trails mohawk-like down her head and neck, Before starting her hunting ritual, she will use some of her prior victim's blood that she keeps in a ceramic jug to paint a grim visage upon her fur, topping it with a helm she cobbled together with from a wyvern skull, the horns of a large wild goat, similar to a markhor, and various large bird feathers, all of which she painted with red and yellow hues, and paired with the grizzly bear hide cloak, dire scorpion carapace, and other animal bones and unique features she adorns herself with. She seems like a grim and unnatural amalgam of beasts and intimidating colors. She wears heavily used hide and armor that's been with her since she was exiled that grants her superior stealth capabilities, and ratty olive-colored clothing beneath that. Though preferring to attack her enemies as various beasts and creatures she can wild shape into, Zyrrazzis does carry around a wicked-looking enchanted spear, but it typically serves more as a walking stick, lever, and general probe, such as for testing the depths of water or for possible traps, than as a weapon. Her dagger, though never used in combat, is used for carving wood and flesh alike. She wears it around one of her powerful legs. 3 wooden chain links dangling from a central wooden ring, all of which she carved herself, hang from a necklace she keeps against her chest, tucked beneath her clothing and armor at all times, although I do paint it, and I didn't paint it under her clothing. A rather plain copper band adorns one of her fingers, keeping her body's basic needs sustained. Upon transforming, all of her gear melds into her body, becoming one with her new form. Her only true companion is her clouded leopard companion Zyrrazzis. Well scarred from battle, the feral cat wears leather saddlebags, keeping various traveling and general supplies handy if the need arises. Zyrrazzis has decorated this with small bones and both crimson and ochre beads to match her own painted on markings. Okay, supplemental information. This is the last chunk. There's a lot, and that's good. When I was trying to draw inspiration for Zyrrazzis, since I'm typically inclined towards playing well-to-do goody two-shoes characters as a preference, that's kind of like me, I did a lot of research on tribal rituals, totems, myths, and grim legends. While there were elements of Baba Yaga to her originally, I was planning on having her entice children out of their homes before abducting them forever. I found far more appeal in the African tribe of the Leopard Society. Here's an excerpt from the Wikipedia article that pretty aptly describes the angle I adopted for the character. Members would dress in leopard skins, waylaying travelers with sharp claw-like weapons in the form of leopards' claws and teeth. The victims' flesh would be cut from their bodies and distributed to members of the secret society. According to their beliefs, the ritual cannibalism would strengthen both members of the secret society as well as their entire tribe. I should try that sometime. It seems such a perfect fit, and was further amplified by the fact that I had already selected a cloud leopard as her animal companion. In addition to this, I tried to sample tribal iconography and colors when I was drawing her, and found some valuable meaning in Native American tribal symbols and color interpretation. I also referenced this document from Wizards of the Coast on playing gnolls very frequently, since the race was pretty unfamiliar to me, short of knowing that they were basically humanoid hyenas. Hyenas that a DM would have lower level adventuring groups fight. So yeah, lots of information, lots of solid, good stuff, which I'm very grateful for. The more I can know about a character, the more anybody can know about a character before putting a single jot or tittle on a sheet of paper, the better. That's all it is just depicting something. I say this almost every video I'd say, but if you don't know who your character is, you should not be drawing. If you're just drawing what you think is cool, then it's just going to look super samey. There's going to be no personality, no distinction, other than just random shape, random chance. It's all got to be there for a reason, and it can be an intimidating prospect, but everything is that way. Every even like if you're comparing it to like real people, like even boring people look the way they do for reasons, and it's telling you about their personality, their life history, their life status. Even just the dull and mundane stuff is important, and it's all there for a reason. So whether you're doing your own character or you're doing a character for somebody else, you have to know as much as possible. Even stuff, if you're asking people for info about someone or you're doing research, even if you're looking at something like a wall of text that looks boring, you gotta read it, because there's sometimes just a tiny little detail about stuff, about things like that that can help out. Even in the case of Zyrrazzis, not boring, but when I read that little detail about her stalking people in the dark, that's why I tilted her ears forward and low. I noticed when, I only really thought about it because of my cat, but when he's like being a schnook and he's peeking over the bed at something that's making a scratching sound, his ears lay flat and they sort of, point forward. And so, like with her doing something similar, I'd imagine, they're not breaking the silhouette of her hunch, of her like big neck, but they're down and low and pointed forward. It could definitely be more low, but I didn't want to make it look like some weird sort of animal emotional display, just something a bit more practical. Kevin actually did supply me with a really good illustration of Zyrrazzis that he had done already. Sadly, I didn't get to include the animal companion, but there's really no time for doing that. The familiar or an animal sidekick definitely doesn't take as much time, but if you're doing something like, I would need to do the research, and like for say like even like a clouded leopard, you do the research, you do the bones, you do the muscles, and then you do the fur, and try to put in some personality and some history and all the character details. There's still so much left to do in there that there just isn't time for me to ever do anybody's familiars as well. They're almost like a character 0.5, like an extra 50. I'd say like I put them about half as much work as a full character, but his illustration does have them. I'd even recommend if he wanted to. He's more than welcome to post them and include or whatever, let everybody see. I don't want to post them on his behalf, but it was really cool to see. And his version of Zyrrazzis is actually very different from mine, but I did try to keep it loyal. In our correspondence, he did mention that any sort of interpretation or change of direction that I wanted to take would be fine by him. So, not that his was bad, but I just wanted to. I wanted to give him something distinct as well, a different view of the same character. It would be one thing to just do like a fan art thing where it's just the exact same thing, but I thought it'd be more fun for him and me, I guess, just to see what can happen with the same description of something. So with the bear skin, I remember when I was in grade 5, my teacher was a hunter and he brought in a bear that he had killed. It was like just the skin, and it was actually kind of cool because there's even like little inside with the claws, or not. I mean, you could sort of put your fingers into its toes a little bit, and you could wear it sort of like a little bear costume cape, and put the head over your head and whatever. And I thought that was really cool. But I just remember the way that the skin looked on the inside, and you could see where the I don't remember what he used to shoot it, but you could see the hole in the skin. So I was just thinking about that and like how uncool taxidermied animals can look. I mean, there's a lot of really good places where you can look up bad taxidermy, but when you have like someone who's not draping it over a mold or like a taxidermy form, they get all floppy and scrunchy and leathery and flat. So even with like the face under her arm there, I just wanted it to be crumpled and dumb looking, but clear enough that it's a face. At least I hope that reads through. I think having the two eyes and the nostril, they're the only real perforations that you can see light through. So I'm hoping that comes through. And then for the giant scorpion carapace parts, it got a little bit confusing with the way that I had the layers set up, but I just powered through in the end. But yeah, scorpions are they're really fun to do. Definitely using reference as far as now I can never remember if I think it's chitin. I think it's actually pronounced chitin, like the material that they're exoskeleton is made of, the hard stuff, CHITIN, I believe it's called. Basically, when I do stuff like this, I like to try to keep it down to as few colors as possible, unless I'm doing something tropical, like a crab or a mantis shrimp or something. But if you're gonna have a large scorpion, I think biologically speaking, large animals, aside from giraffes, are very monochromatic. Whether it's whales or elephants or cows, for the most part, like wild cows, buffaloes, hippos, rhinos, they're very dull and earthy colored. I don't know if it's just that maybe they don't want to draw attention to themselves, or that's just kind of the way it goes. But I'd imagine a scorpion, they're ambush predators, really, for the most part. So something a bit dull and more mundane, but with keeping it to a limited palette. Basically, I'm thinking of like a normal chitin, but then a thicker, more dense one. And so that sort of gives me the two colors that I want to work with when doing it. I can add more. You can add more if you're ever doing that sort of stuff. But basically, like the harder and denser and more layered up the material is, the darker it's going to be. So, in this one, I guess it is it's more three colors, sort of based on how a scorpion shingles work. The lighter edge around, or lighter edges, and then the darker where the spikes are. I gave it spikes because I figured that would help make her look a little bit more nasty, but also just, spikes make sense for a giant scorpion to have, especially because there'd be a lot of things that could jump on it and attack it and cut its belly open. But even just for having something a bit more nasty, armor is one thing, but armor with spikes on it, I always hate on spiky shoulder pads, but if you can find a justification for them, then I am 100% for them. They just got to be there for a good reason and for a good use. And in this case, I felt it was quite biologically sound that they would have them, so I threw them in. So yeah, I did take some figuring out, lots of rendering. That seems to be how everything gets done, the Painterly style. And there's also in Kevin's original drawing, the horns were different. It is from an existing animal, but I didn't go his horns were quite different from the creature that he sent me. So I felt a little bit of room to go away from that as well. I don't like to often take things too one-to-one from real life or from the real natural world. Absolutely got to ground things, got to base stuff on real things for the most part. But in this case, I felt that the I don't remember what the animal is called. There's some sort of goat, sheep, deer thing from Africa, I want to say. I can't remember where it's from, but it's very distinct looking horns, and I didn't want to go too much that way, but I figured something in this world could have evolved a similar shaped horns. The horns are just going to be shaped the way they are for what they got to do. So it makes sense that something like that would evolve somewhere else. Something similar enough. These ones are quite different, but I also didn't want them to be symmetrical. I wanted them to either seem like she's killed multiple of these and she took the horn that she liked most, or she killed like a sickly, gross, diseased one, where they're all gnarly and asymmetrical and kind of floppy and curled up and gross. It made her look a little bit more nasty. So yeah, for the most part, everything just blocking it in. That's got to be there. It's got to be visible. I put in this straw here. The original illustration didn't have this straw. She just sort of had some kind of wrappings around her wrists. But this one sort of made... I remember I didn't like the film, but in World War Z, when with Brad Pitt, at the end when they just wrapped magazines around their forearms so that they could use their arms to keep zombies from biting them. I mean, I think the final nail in the zombie coffin was put in years ago, but that move was kind of like maybe like just pissed on that grave a little bit with just how ridiculous and simple and genius of a solution that is. Because it's kind of like even like breaking a car window. Like no one's gonna break a car window with their hand. Like sure, it's happened, but there's usually like some level of PCP involved. But no one's gonna be able to bite through a magazine. And yeah, I mean, having like a bunch of hay around her arm like that, people are gonna be able to. Anybody could bite through that or anything, but that's just where my inspiration was. Like something similar, but something practical and something. It's not gonna like having light armor around an arm is more of a deflection thing than a your main sort of threat. Something light, and like who knows, it could even be there for some sort of like making sound or wiping sweat from her brow. If she even does sweat, I'd imagine hyenas don't sweat. I don't know. Sometimes it can surprise you what animals sweat or not. Yeah, hyenas are really weird. They fall in a very strange place on the tree of life. Very fascinating animals. See, I'm painting up this wyvern skull. I did want to make sure that I included some level of brown in the shadows of the bone, just in certain spots for having like a bit of a subsurface scattering look. So some light passing into the bone. Not too much. It's pretty dry by now, pretty old. It's not going to be too much of that going on. Yeah, here's trying to make sure that I'm not missing anything. So looking back and seeing what the original sketch looked like. So yeah, lots of feathers. Very scraggly, very unkempt. I mean, she's basically awake all the time. She's living in the woods. She's evil. Gotta have evil and messy and scraggly are often very they go very well together. But again, even if you have characters that have such a fundamental aspect in common, being evil, there's so many different forms that evil can take, even in like an over the top fantasy world, like in D&D and D&D type games. I mean, even just like evil could be like Sheriff of Nottingham, kind of a corrupt like tax collector guy. It could be like a Nosferatu. It could be even like a classy an upper class Dracula kind of vampire. It could be like this savage, like wild beast person that's messy and eats people and tortures them. And there's like chaotic evil. There's, I mean, like the standard sort of alignment scale, of course. But evil is evil's a it's a pretty complicated subject in a lot of cases. But yeah, I mean, evil is going to evil. It's always going to. You can make something read as evil in a lot of different ways. Yeah, I threw a little bird skull on her thigh and some arrowheads. I believe the original. I don't have it open now, but I believe the original did have some arrowheads on the thigh armor part. So I wanted to. I did change a lot, so I did want to tie things back in as many places as was suitable. I mean, if Kevin felt it was important enough to add, I should probably feel that way too. I did do the necklace a little bit different. I'd imagine that Kevin was imagining it being all of the because he described it as wooden chain links, that they would be connected, but I felt that'd be a bit too rattly. So I made them sort of hanging apart from each other, even though they'd probably still clink around and be like sort of a wood chime thing. It's just sort of to separate them a bit, I thought would be good. For the eyes in this case, I felt that it would be better, after all, to make them a little bit more enlarged and more visible and open. But I didn't want to include any sort of visible iris or pupil, any sort of distinct typical eye features like sclera, which is the whites, and the iris and the pupil and things. Just I wanted her to have like gross, beady eyes that you couldn't relate to, that were just dark and animalistic and unsympathetic. It's a pretty common method of making something look evil, if it's the right way you want them to look evil, is smaller eyes or beadier eyes. Usually small does a good job. Closer together is better than far apart. Eyes being far apart makes something look adorable and good. And here's just some nasty red paint runes. She does have red and yellow, but I didn't want to go too red or too yellow. I was thinking of like times when I've like rubbed a dandelion on a piece of wood as a kid, or like dried blood. Like, where's she getting these pigments? I'm a little bit curious about where she'd get pigments for the feathers, just because I'm picturing them being dark feathers with paint on them. It could even just be like mud with some kind of pigmentation, or like ground up flower petals or something. I don't remember what they used for yellow pigments. But yeah, just anything that's not too artificial looking. Like, it shouldn't look like a jersey, like a football jersey or something. Very naturalistic colors. And a good thing about a bit of a more naturalistic overall haze of brownish, greenish tinge to her is that it makes her look a little bit more kind of covered all with the same kind of mess. Like, just living in the dirt, kind of everything gets dull in similar degrees. Now, without too much deviation from the original or the description. I mean, they are quite different. Like, even like the face mask and stuff. I guess there's no point in just describing things are different. But okay, so for the spear, I wanted something. I mean, he described it as being gnarly and wicked looking. So I knew that I wanted to give it something like dynamic and pointy and nasty and stabby on the front end, and I thought that her being out in the woods and catching things and eating things, and just something pointy and mean and barbed and trappish, something that would like latch on. I was reminded by Inuit fishing spears, and so I thought that would be sort of a neat thing, something barbed. And so it's like, in this case, this has three. It breaks off into three sort of heads with all these nasty teeth in there. But the fish would go, or the person's face, or whatever you got, would go in, like the three arms sort of flex out and reach around what you're grabbing, and then the teeth and the barbs hook onto it and latch onto whatever was going in there. So yeah, something, I figured that'd be sort of nasty looking, sort of gnarly and wicked looking. So even just thinking about like how this might have been made, so something that's been, I guess, trifected rather than bifected, I think, and then blackened in a fire, not roasted, but it's singed on both ends for hardening the wood, and then having some sort of rattan sort of around the two parts, keeping them from fraying out and splitting down the shaft too much. And then on these parts, I thought, to help, I mean, in order to have give those things that curve, you would need to steam them and then hold them in place with some sort of frame. But I thought maybe that could help. But also if they just had some sort of extra twine holding them back, add some tension there. And then using some sort of pitch or resin or something to hold them in, and then that's worn away off the teeth and everything. So anyway, this was a blast to do. So happy to do something for Kevin. I was so glad that he won. Zyrrazzis was a joy to work on, even though she was very intimidating and had a lot of detail and a lot of history and a lot of little pieces and trinkets and things. But either way, the challenge is always worth it, and it was a great time to work on this. But For those interested, this was done for the free weekly character art lottery that I'm holding now. Every Sunday and Monday, or every Sunday, I let you know what hashtag to tweet before Tuesday to enter that week's contest. And if you win, then I'll design and illustrate your D&D fantasy character that you love so much that you've made yourself. Send me the description if you win, and I'll do this. So anyway, this is Zyrrazzis for Kevin. Hope it helped.